Thank you, Can Corla. I'm delighted to have an opportunity to speak on this issue, very emotive issue, an issue that needs to be dealt with. And in the first instance, I would have to say that I reject in its entirety the continuous allegations against Fine Gael and whoever else to the effect that we are all a bunch of hard right-wing opportunists and that we have no concern for the people. I might remind everybody on all sides of the House that in the 40s, 50s, 70s, again, in the 80s and 90s, Fine Gael itself directly or in conjunction with the Labour Party brought forward some of the most progressive legislation in the history of this state. And if anybody doesn't believe that, let them go back and have a look at it again, where it came from and the time, and in the time and in the circumstances that prevailed at the time. Similarly, in respect of the housing situation, we might refer back to the 80s. The late Peter Barry, when Minister, introduced very important legislation 6 months after coming into office, the Housing Finance Agency loan system, which was the means to affordable housing for many people who couldn't acquire a house before that. He was sneered at and regarded as a merchant prince, but the legislation he introduced dealt with the housing situation in a very meaningful and serious way in fast time. So I think that the Minister has introduced regulations, proposed to introduce regulations now to address the issues that have emerged. And I think that my only criticism is that we weren't alerted to these issues by the central bank, by the financial regulator, by people who we rely on to hear in early stage what's happening in financial environments. That didn't happen, and I have raised that separately in the relevant committee. I want to say this, Can Corla, you and I dealt with housing for a long year in our own constituency of Kildare. And we dealt with it successfully. And we made it possible through our own efforts and our own example to ensure that people on the average industrial wage were able to acquire and own their own house, and they did. And various people advised us and tried to dissuade us, but we prevailed. So what I say now is, I think, Minister, and I hope this happens, I think that you have introduced the warning shots across the bows of the investor, or the strategic investor, or the vulture fund, or whatever we want to call it. I think that anybody who intervenes in the provision of housing and the supply of housing at the present time in a way that will in any way increase the price of the product or restrict the availability of the product to the market, I think it is not in the national interest. And let's remember this, that affordable housing is part of our taxation system. It has always been that way. So it was always necessary to ensure that there was a supply of houses available to people who wish to own their own house. And don't forget this, we were criticised for many years by people who said, really the problem in this country is people wish to own their own house. They shouldn't. They should rely on renting their properties. All rubbish, Can Corla, and you and I well know that. So security is what follows people, and it's a part of what they think about all the time. That when they go to purchase a house or rent a house or whatever, the first thing they look for is security. So why do they want to buy their house? For security reasons. Then they are not at any landlord's behest. They can't be kicked in or out of the house at somebody else's whim. And they're entitled to that. Under our constitution, they're entitled to that. And long may that continue. So what I would ask now at this stage, and I support the Minister's proposals, but I would ask that they be monitored very carefully in the shortest possible time to ensure that the provisions now proposed are doing their job. And for those who want to be cynical, and say, well, it's not going to work, we don't know. But I would remind everybody, and we were all part of it, former Taoiseach Enda Kenny set up an all-party committee to study the housing needs and what to do about it back in 2016. And I remember well, because I made proposals which were very similar to those put forward by people in the opposition now. in order to deal with the housing situation and do it in a very quick and effective way. And effectively what I said was at the time to shift the onus over to direct build for the local authority, not necessarily by the local authorities, because local authorities do not employ plumbers and bricklayers and people to carry out the work themselves. That is ineffective. It's gone out with the arc. So the new system is the contractor is contracted to build and design and prepare, whatever the case may be, and look for planning permission if necessary, because that's at the behest of the local authority in any event, and to provide houses that were affordable. And they would be houses for rent through the local authority system or for purchase, but they would be affordable. And let's not forget this. In a local authority house, the provision was always there after 1 year of tenancy to buy the property. And that's something that was very progressive and helpful. And as a result, there was an income coming in from that particular property by way of a mortgage. So let's go back to what happened. I think that the All-Party Housing Committee made a mistake. It didn't determine that there should be a total emphasis on the provision of affordable housing. It came up with a series of proposals because nobody would agree. All the parties didn't agree. That was what the problem was, and still is, as we can see. But what happened was a series of measures to which not everybody agreed to all of them, but everybody agreed to some. And the problem is that we have since pursued that policy, and we're pursuing it to this day and will. And my view on that is this: as long as we have too many options available, each does a little bit, ultimately one or other will in fact conflict with the other and will cause confusion and will cause the creation of obstacles, and we will end up in a situation whereby each will succeed a little way. But the final analysis, we will not reach our targets. So I would say, Minister, I agree with the measures you've taken. Various people will dispute whether they're severe enough or not to do the job that is required. I honestly don't know. But we will need to know fairly soon. And if these particular measures do not do the job expected, well then we have to go back again. The next point I want to refer to is that I think the people have a right, to at some stage, to know that we all have to think about their interests. Not much sense in thinking about our own interests. We have to think about their interests. And we have to be seen to respond to their needs as their needs arise. And I get emails like everybody else does from time to time, and some saying, I speak strangely for a member of the Gael. Well, I don't. I've spoken like this all my life, Corla, as you well know. And the fact of the matter is this, and you did too. The fact of the matter is this: we never spoke in a way that was adversely disposed to our electorate. And that means all of the electorate who are entitled to live, have a constitutional right to have the benefits of our constitution at all times in their way of life, and in the provision of homes, in the provision of jobs, and the provision of infrastructure. Housing is a vital part of our infrastructure. And we need to invest more in it, and we need to deal with the issue now. And the last point I want to make is simply this. I think that one of the mistakes that the Housing Committee, All-Party Housing Committee, made then is that it didn't identify the size of the problem ahead of us. And I'm not certain that we have done that just yet. Because one thing that I worry about is this, that, we're told we have to build 35,000 houses. I think we need to build 55,000 houses for each of the next 2 or 3 years, and maybe more. Because if we look at our own individual local authorities, we find that the number on the waiting list is going up. The number on the waiting list is going up, and that shouldn't be. And I know we have had the onset of COVID, and I know that's interrupted, and we had obviously the financial crash, the housing crash, and so on. But we have to get out of the situation we have found ourselves in at some stage. And I think we need to put ourselves in a solid financial footing insofar as the provision of housing for our population is concerned. And that means all of the population. Nobody should be left out. And they shouldn't feel that they are likely to be left out, because they are all entitled to the best that can be given under our Constitution. So let me finish off by simply saying I've already tried this, as I've said before in the House, and I know that other members of our county have done the same thing and have proven that houses could be produced at a fraction of the cost that they were on the market at the same time, in the middle of the Celtic Tiger. And if that could be done, then it can still be done. So we have to set about finding the ways and means to do it. And as I said at the beginning, I hope that this is sufficient now. If it isn't, these measures are not sufficient now, and the Minister knows this quite well, we've discussed it many times, then we have to move again. But we do have to do one thing. We have to make it quite clear that no government could come at the behest of powerful financial organisations who can move the deck chairs around from under the people sitting on them. And we should not ever tolerate that. And we must, with full resolve, go forward, resolve to provide more houses than we've targeted for, as necessary, in order to meet the full extent of the demand. Thank you, Can Comhairle.